On Wall Street, Stephen, where the markets hit a record high yesterday.
Yes, hello Claire. The S&P 500 closed at a new record 1,848, that key number, just squeaking past the previous record set by the indice last month. As you can see, it was a fairly positive day across Wall Street, helped by results from Bank of America, the second biggest lender in the United States, which reported a quadrupling of profits for the last 3 months of 2013. Over in Asia, that lead from Wall Street also helped things on the Asian markets too. A broadly positive picture. In Japan, the Nikkei had its best day in 4 months yesterday, but not so positive today, just down slightly in the red as investors take profits out of Japanese stocks. Over in Sydney, the Australian dollar fell to a 3.5-year low after new figures showed the number of people in employment there dropped by 22,000 in December. That not dampening sentiment on the markets too much though, with the ASX 200 in Sydney up by over 1%.
After the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund is also being optimistic about the global economy, but it comes with a warning, Stephen.
Yeah, and that warning is deflation or falling prices. That's bad news for an economy because if prices are falling, people stop spending in anticipation of perhaps further falls in the future. Now, the IMF says that deflation poses a big threat to the global economic recovery, which it sees as still being fragile. The managing director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, says central banks should begin reducing their monetary stimulus once growth starts to stabilise.
Now in the US, more progress towards...
With inflation running way below central bank targets in most corners, clearly we are seeing rising risk of deflation, which could prove disastrous for the recovery. If inflation is the genie, then certainly deflation is the ogre. That must be fought decisively.
And in the US, more progress towards a budget agreement there.
Yeah, that's right. Significant hurdle been passed, in fact, by this spending bill being approved by the House of Representatives by a massive majority, 359 votes to 67, approved this $1.1 trillion spending plan. It's not a complete budget. It avoids many contentious areas, but it is a sign of the truce now on Capitol Hill after the government shutdown that we saw because of a different budget battle back in October. Now the bill now goes to the Senate for approval and will then have to be signed into law by President Obama.
And staying in the US, we've been covering the Detroit Motor Show all week. Today you're looking at luxury car brands.
Yeah, the top range the top range models are interesting because they're not as vulnerable as other car brands to changes in the economy, and they do benefit though from an upturn in sales, which we've seen in the United States with sales returning to pre-recession levels last year. That means for the lucky few, it's time to party.
Kicking off the Detroit Auto Show in style, Mercedes enlisted former Destiny's Child star Kelly Rowland to help give the launch of their new C-Class a bit of sparkle. The German car maker could be excused a bit of exuberance. It claimed top spot in the US luxury market in 2013. However, that wasn't enough to get it to number one worldwide. That honour went to BMW.
It was our most successful year ever in sales, with over 1.96 million vehicles sold worldwide.
But nothing stays the same for long in the car industry, and while luxury marques trade on heritage, that doesn't mean they're immune to change. Jaguar Land Rover have just announced record sales, up nearly a fifth on the previous year.
50% of our sales now are in emerging markets. And we're making sure that that continues in the future because we've got a new joint venture with Chery in China.
European marques are seeing their dominance challenged. In the US, Cadillac has recently gained more of a spring in its step.
But I think in terms of the top of the segment, it's still dominated by the European manufacturers. Cadillac is trying to price itself up into that territory.
Luxury vehicles still only account for around 10% of the US market. But when it comes to profit, they take a much larger slice of the action, meaning it's likely that competition will only increase in the years to come.
Let's move on now with a look at some of the day's other business stories. And Apple is to repay consumers more than $32 million to settle a complaint taken by US regulators over the way it handles in-app purchases. The complaint from the Federal Trade Commission is over children incurring charges on their parents' accounts while using mobile games without giving express permission. Apple will now have to change its billing practices to make it more obvious that purchases are taking place. And Yahoo's chief operating officer is to leave the company after just over a year in the job. Enrique de Castro was hired in a $58 million deal to help the company lure more advertisers to its online services. Yahoo didn't give a reason for his departure, but his replacement hasn't yet been announced.
And finally, Stephen, you're going to tell us who's the most fulfilled person at work.
I know, you're only delighted to find this out, I'm sure, Claire. A study carried out by the recruitment firm Randstad in the United Kingdom asked 2,000 workers about how happy they were in their professional life. This is the profile of the most fulfilled worker they came up with. She's a 40-year-old woman, highly educated, has a sense of vocation about her job and a positive personality, and earns an average of €38,000. Now, the industries filled with the highest proportion of fulfilled workers were construction, farming, teaching and health. The least, or the most unhappy, or the least fulfilled were those in manufacturing, the public sector and financial services. I did look for figures for the media and I couldn't find them, so I think we float somewhere in the middle.
Oh dear, I wouldn't want to know. Thank you very much, Stephen Carroll, for that roundup of the business news, and of course you're back a little later. Now it's time for web news, and surprise, surprise, American actress Jennifer Lawrence is the latest internet sensation.
Under fire for the drop in